So good afternoon, everybody. For those of us in Europe, my name is Jonathan Viner. I'm your host for today's webinar session, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this, the third Sanako webinar for language teaching professionals. As you can see from the slide in front of you, today's session is about how to conduct speaking activities online effectively. And I'm delighted to introduce Aleksis Juhakoski, who will be leading you through today's session. Aleksis is a solution specialist at Sanako. He's an expert in language learning technologies, and he's been working for over 12 years with education customers for Sanako around the world. And in that time, he's obviously seen significant changes in approaches to language teaching and the use of technology to support both educators and students. So we're delighted to have him today to talk to us. He has a fantastic background in phonetics and phonology from the University of Turku in Finland. And Aleksis spends his days making sure that Sanako solutions are as accessible, as effective as possible for language teachers and institutions worldwide. So Aleksis, thank you for joining us this evening. I know we're all looking forward to hearing your insights and seeing your demonstrations as we go.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So just by way of practicalities, as we've mentioned, we will be recording the webinar now, and that link will then be circulated to everybody who registered to attend tonight's session. We will also be publishing a link on Sanako's social media schedule so that we can share this with as many interested parties as possible. Please do stay until the end to learn a little bit more about a free product trial offer that we will be offering to everybody. And as we've mentioned, please note that attendees will be muted by default. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. And do note that any questions will be visible to all participants. So please don't post anything that you wouldn't want anybody else to read. And just by way of a brief introduction to Sanako itself, Sanako was established in 1961, so we've got a significant birthday coming up later this year. We are a Finnish educational technology company who is focused on providing a wide range of language learning and language teaching solutions. At the heart of our work is our mission, which is all about helping people to teach and to learn languages more efficiently and more effectively. And it's worth noting we are a significant global player. So we have customers in over 110 countries, and our classrooms are used in over 50,000 classrooms worldwide. Whatever a classroom is these days, of course. So significant experience that we could bring to bear to tonight's session. And so without further ado, I will hand over to Aleksis to deliver tonight's webinar. Aleksis, over to you.
Thank you for the kind words, Jonathan.
A pleasure.
I'll just share my screen here and start the presentation itself. So, the topic of today's webinar is how to conduct speaking activities online effectively. The topics we'll cover today will first go through some general tips. Now, for the past year or so, I've spent my time training and helping our teacher users to overcome any difficulties they have when teaching languages online. And I've learned a lot from you, so I will be sharing tips that I've learned along the way during those training sessions and troubleshooting sessions. There are some general tips that will help you to conduct your speaking activities online very effectively. We'll also take a look at two different exercise types that are very convenient to use whether you're teaching asynchronously or synchronously. And you can modify these exercise types to fit your lessons very easily. So for each exercise type, We'll take a look at why that exercise type works, what you'll need to create one, and we'll take a look at an example exercise. Now for these example exercises, I will be using one of our solutions to show you how I've created it. You can of course use the solution of your choice to create a similar exercise. It's all very simple. So let's go to the general tips. First tip I'm going to offer you today is to prepare the exercises in advance. This is, well, pretty straightforward, but if you don't prepare your exercises in advance, you will be running out of time when you're teaching your lessons. And it makes it easier to have something prepared, so when your students enter, you're ready to start the activities. Another tip is to have other exercises ready for your students to complete while you're reviewing the previous exercise. Both of the examples I'm going to share with you today are very good for this type of solution. The next tip is to use one system at a time if possible. Otherwise, you will be managing two systems at the same time, and it will most likely make your lessons harder to administer. The next tip is that if you're using video, you can consider turning the video off while your students are working on their exercises. It helps them to focus on their pronunciation, and they won't be distracted by other students who appear on their screen. Feedback is a great way to motivate your students to listen to their recordings. So whenever you share an exercise with your students and they do some recording work, make sure to give them some feedback, because they will be listening with intent on, they will be listening to their recordings with more intent. And the last tip is to take it easy. It's better to be calm than trying to accomplish many things at the same time. Okay, so let's take a look at the first exercise type today, which is model imitation. It's probably very familiar to all of you, but we'll see if we can create a new twist with the modern technology. As a primer, let's watch a short video which relates to model imitation. That's enough of that. So for model imitation exercises, why I chose that video to start off with is because of the bird we saw in the video was a minor bird, and we share a gene with the minor bird called FOXP2, and because of that gene, we are also very good at learning through imitation. So model imitation gives you excellent tools to learn a language. In a typical model imitation exercise, your students will be immersed in the target language. They will hear rhythm, intonation, and stress, and it helps them to familiarize with the language as well. Your students will also be recording themselves using the target language, which is active practice. Your students practice their muscles and their fluency while recording. And afterwards, your students will review their own recordings, which allows for self-reflection and correction. We humans are really good at spotting imperfections. So when your students are listening back to their own recordings, they will self-correct and reflect. This is what you'll need for a typical model imitation exercise. You'll need an audio or a video file in the target language, preferably one with a single speaker. Now you can record the audio and video yourself very easily. So it's very easy to have access to the source files. Then you will need a 2-track recorder. You will need this so that your students can listen to the source file and record themselves afterwards. The tip that I'm offering for a model imitation exercise is that you can easily record yourself and use that video or audio as the source. Or also, if you're planning on using video for your model imitation exercises, a website called archive.org has a huge selection of videos to choose from. Some of them are very historical and old, but you can still use bits and pieces from them to create your model imitation exercises. So let's take a look at a typical model imitation exercise that I've set up in our solution. We'll take a look at the teacher side. So I have a model imitation exercise prepared for my students, and this is what the students will see when they are doing the exercise. I've first included instructions. I want my students to watch the video through once. This will prime them and they will be ready for the exercise. Their ears are ready and their brains are already working. When they've done watching the video once, they'll record themselves, repeating each sentence. So they go through the video sentence by sentence, and I want them to imitate the original as closely as possible. So when the students record themselves, their recordings will appear here on the timeline. We've already got a submission from one of my students, so we can take a look at how this particular student has completed their exercise. As you can probably tell from the video, this student has already done pretty well. So here you see the orange parts students have recorded themselves. As a teacher, I'm going to find parts where perhaps their pronunciation wasn't as good as they intended. So I'm going to write a comment here to let them know that they should review their pronunciation. I'll just add that in. Then we'll find another part. For example, I can record myself, record my comment as well, and then I send that over to the student. This ensures that my students will listen back to their own recordings for the model imitation exercise. Okay. Let's move on and take a look at the other exercise type we're going through today. So this one is role play. Role playing is very flexible, and the reasons to use it is that it fosters retention. The students use emotions when they are role playing, so they will most likely remember what they produced better. It also contextualizes language use. The vocabulary, intonation, and behavior patterns we use vary according to the role we take. So this is a very creative exercise, and you can easily customize it to be used in multiple different roles. It's very multifunctional. It can be used asynchronously, which means that you can give your students homework, for example, where you want them to read something or act out a role and record themselves. You can also use it synchronously as a pair or a group exercise or as a teacher-led exercise. It depends on the materials that you're going to use. So what you'll need for the role play exercise. For this example, we're going to create an audiobook narrator role play exercise. So what we need for an exercise of this type is a passage of text in the target language. We'll also need a recorder for the students to record themselves. One good tip here is there's a website called Project Gutenberg, which collects books and plays that have gone out of copyright. So they are free to use. And you can find a huge selection of languages there, a lot of really classical books that you can easily choose a chapter or two for your students to read for this audiobook narrator role play. It's also a good idea to use images to make your exercises more interesting. There's a website called Pixabay, which has a huge selection of images to choose from again. These images can be used to make your exercises look more appealing to the students and immerse them more. Now let's take a look at the exercise that I've created for my students as a role-playing exercise. Here, the setup for this exercise is I've told my students that they will be narrating an audiobook. I want them to imagine themselves as the narrator. So I've included an excerpt from The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. I want my students to read through it once and then record themselves reading them. I also want my students to listen back to what they recorded. I've also enabled an option that allows my students to download their recordings as well. So when my student has completed this exercise and they are happy with it, they can download it and maybe share it with their parents or their friends. So here I've added an image from Pixabay to make the exercise more exciting. I've also included a chapter from The Wizard of Oz, and my students will just click on the record button and read through the chapter that I've included in this book. And after they've recorded themselves, they can download what they just did. So again, let's take a look at submissions. These are completed exercises by my students. So the role play exercise is right here, and we're going to take a look at one of the student responses for this exercise. We can easily review it by clicking on play. Dorothy lived in the midst of the great Kansas prairies with Uncle Henry, who was a farmer, and Aunt Em, who was the... Okay, so we can go through the entire recording, and again, we can assign feedback for our students to make sure that they actually listen back to what they did. Most likely, you'll find that your students are inspired by the task and they are doing better than they normally do because of the role play. Everyone has heard an audiobook, or perhaps someone has read a book to them, so they know how the narrator works. Okay, that concludes today's presentation. I look forward to your questions and your feedback. Thank you.
Aleksis, thank you very much indeed for that. A couple of fantastic examples there of how to use online techniques for teaching for speaking practice. And thank you everybody for the questions that you've been asking already, which we've been answering behind the scenes through the Q&A. A couple of questions for me, and then I will open the floor and ask Aleksis some of the questions that you've been mentioning. But as he says, please do use the Q&A function to ask your questions for your particular setting and your particular circumstance. Aleksis, when we're talking about online speaking opportunities, can you just talk a little bit about how webinar attendees can use, can just encourage kind of normal conversation perhaps between a pair of students or a group of students in an online environment? How might you suggest they could usefully set that up and then deliver that online?
I'd definitely give the students a prepared text first. So perhaps a piece of an excerpt from a play would work very good in that environment. Then they have something to get the conversation going, unless you've already prepared an exercise for that. But that's a very good option to have. There's some playfulness in that kind of activity, which opens up the students very nicely. Okay.
Excellent. Well, we've already got questions coming in, so I'm going to jump. Straight to those. Some questions around can we get hold of recordings? Again, to reiterate, we will be circulating the recording to everybody that asked for one. A question from Pilar here about role play and its suitability for students of different ages. Aleksis, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on role play's kind of generic suitability for students of different ages, or how educators might make it relevant for their particular audience that they're teaching.
Well, for role play, you of course have to be mindful of the age group you're teaching. So you shouldn't choose a too demanding text if you're teaching younger children, for example. But the role play exercise is very flexible in a way, because you can definitely choose a harder text for older students. I'm sure all ages enjoy role play because that's something different.
And a question here that we've had around feedback and giving feedback. The question has been asked saying, I'll quote it verbatim, it's hard to give feedback to the whole class during the lesson. Can they access the feedback afterwards? Can you just explain whether how that feedback mechanism works, please?
Yes, exactly. Well, of course they can access the feedback afterwards as well. You don't have to do it in real time. Although, if you're planning on doing an exercise in real time where you're planning on giving feedback, I would have them working on another exercise, like the general tip I gave in the beginning of the webinar. So your students will be working on another exercise, and then you'll have time to review their exercises while they work on that one. But of course, your students can access the feedback that you've given, at least in our solution, yes.
And a question on grading, Aleksis. Again, a two-part question here. How do you grade the assignments, such as grading criteria, points assigned, and then another part, how much time do you spend on grading each student's assignment? I don't know whether there are any generic guidelines you can give. Presumably that applies, will depend a lot on the specific setting and the specific educator and students.
Well, yes, that's exactly right. There's no uniform answer that is something that I can give you that you will definitely use in your class. Basically, the grading is very open-ended, and it depends on your location, your school, how you actually grade your students. So there's no set way of grading your students in any of these solutions. Basically, it's up to the teacher.
Okay. Aleksis, somebody's asked a question about your first activity, saying you mentioned a website for it. Can you just remind everybody what the link for that website was?
Yes. The link was archive.org.
Archive.org. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, that's a collection of audio and video images, whatever you can find on the internet, or so it's a very, very good database, and it's all free.
Great. Ivana, I hope that's answered your question. Aleksis, there's a couple of questions that we've had. You mentioned something called the 2-track recorder. So first of all, so I've got a couple of questions about the two-track recorder. Put my teeth in. Can you just explain what you mean by a 2-track recorder, please?
Yes, the 2-track recorder always contains 2 tracks. So there's one track which is called the master track. It plays back the audio or video file that the teacher has chosen. And then there's another track where the students record their voice. They can be played alongside each other. For example, I can, well, I better not share my screen at this point, but the students would be listening to an audio file on the other track, and then they record themselves, and those recordings appear on the other track of the 2-track recorder.
Okay, so we have a greeting from Farah in Arizona. Farah, thank you for joining us this morning. For you, I guess, your time. She asks, asks, for the model limitation, what if the students don't have access to 2-track recorders? What are the other solutions that teachers could provide for the students?
Well, one option is to, if you only have access to a recorder, so your students can still record themselves, I would use another app, or perhaps play the YouTube video in the background and just record myself speaking on top of that. It's a lot trickier though, so a 2-track recorder is of course preferred because it specializes in activities like model limitation.
And the 2-track recorder is of course part of the Sanako Connect proposition, which was the system you were demonstrating and using in your exercises.
Exactly.
A question here from Svetlana saying, a question about interpersonal speaking. Can 2 students record a dialogue, a spontaneous one, at the same time, or is it only for one student to record at a time?
No, of course, the students can be grouped and they can record their discussion. You can have a group discussion, you can have multiple students in the same group recording their exercise. The reason I showed you the exercises for a single student only, because it gives the exercise much more applicability. You can use it synchronously, or you can assign it as homework for your students. So you don't have to be using the language lab while your students complete the exercise.
And presumably in those circumstances, the students, in answer Galaxy Tab to your question, the students are listening to each other and talking to each other and sharing a normal conversation as we are now. You're nodding, or you can't hear me. Okay, let me ask you, do keep the questions coming. We've got about 3 or 4 more minutes for questions, so please do keep the questions coming. Aleksis, can I just check? Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah, okay, good. A question I've been asked, or question we've been asked here, is it possible to add a call the teacher button in the student side, just to enable the student to send a message to the teacher? That's from Axel.
Yes, of course it is. At the moment, it's possible to send messages to your teacher, which your teacher will be notified for. But a teacher call button is, of course, something that's very useful. And we thank you for the feedback, Axel.
Great. A question, we've had this one in for a moment. An anonymous viewer has asked, what is your favorite type of teaching activity? I guess you've given us a couple already. Any other types of teaching activity that you particularly find beneficial or advantageous for driving learning impact?
Well, I love a specific type of exercise in addition to these two. It's called minimal pairs. It's an
Okay.
exercise where you focus on the differences between the the language the student speaks and the target language that they are learning. So you focus on specific phonetic differences. For example, bit and pit. There's a single phoneme difference there in bit and pit. But for some languages, they don't distinguish between those two sounds. So practicing those is a very, very efficient way of learning a new language. It's harder to set up because of the you have to know the cultural background or of every student to make it really efficient. Everyone has to be on the same page, so to speak.
Talking of different language learners, we have a question here from Sandra. I'm just going to read it out to you. She says, most of the students who take Spanish, presumably at her institution, are heritage learners. So they're second or third generation learners whose approach to learning Spanish is a little bit different from SL learners. She says that HL need help writing Spanish, particularly in academic settings. She says, I prepare compare and contrast activities in Sanako Connect, such as comparing a website that presents their website both in English or Spanish. However, she says, do you have any other recommendations of what she might be able to use in her classrooms?
That's a very specific question. For that kind of exercise, I unfortunately don't have anything at the moment. But if we come across anything, we can surely share that.
And Sandra, if you have any further questions, please do, when we send you the link, with a webinar recording, do respond to that, and we will pick up and answer that one directly. A question from Monica asking about adult learning, and I guess at the heart of her question is what you've described a technique that's applicable for students and language learners of all ages?
Yes, I wouldn't make a difference per se in adult learners versus younger learners. The younger learners will most likely pick up the language more efficiently, but the adult learners will be more motivated to learn the language. So for adult learners, I would just give them more practice.
And a question that's close to my heart, given that I hate to hear my voice being recorded, somebody has asked a question here saying, how can you encourage students to really listen back to themselves? Many rush through the exercises without listening and appraising properly. So how would you encourage our educators to get people to take that element and that feedback seriously?
Well, we took a look during these two exercises that it's a good way to get your students to listen back to their recording, to give feedback in specific parts. They will get over it. It's horrible at first to listen to your own voice being recorded. It's horrible for everyone because we hear it differently. Our bones don't amplify the sound, so we sound a little. Our voice is a little bit higher when it's recorded. But your students will be used to that if you just keep giving them recording exercises. And the role play exercise is a great exercise for this particular thing because they can express themselves through a role, so they don't have to be so self-conscious of their own voice.
A question, I guess, a relatively generic question about doing pair work and group work online. I don't know if you've got any tips on how people can, how educators can conduct those activities more effectively.
Well, not specifically in the online area. I think it's an exercise type that requires setup, even in the classroom. So the same rules apply for the online language learning. I would just worry about what I want them to do. The technical part is already there. So it's possible to do it through many different solutions. I would just I would worry about what I want my students to be doing during the paired activity.
Okay, and then some further questions here about Sanako Connect specifically. A question from Massimiliano: is the Sanako Connect to be purchased separately, or is it available to everybody who has a physical Sanako lab?
Well, it's available separately, but it can be used alongside, and I do recommend using it alongside your physical language lab, because it gives you a lot more options than a physical language lab, and vice versa. With an online solution, your students can be working from their home. They can record on their own time. You don't have to be present when your students are working on the exercises, etc. So there's a lot of good things that come from the online solution.
And just to double check, a question here from Svetlana, who asks, as far as I understand, the option of recording a group conversation is only available if students are in a lab at school, or can that be done on their computers remotely? I'm guessing from what you just said, yes, it can be done remotely.
Yes, it can. It definitely can be done remotely. Of course, it depends on the solution, but for our solution, it's already there. So if your students are paired up and there's an exercise shared where they record themselves, the group discussion will be recorded, of course.
A question from Barbara Whittle. Barbara asks, when the student repeats the original track, can the tutor record themselves after the student's track to correct any mistakes the student might have made? She recalls being able to do this on campus with Sanako. Is that still possible, and is that possible online?
Yes, it's possible. You would be recording your corrected version as feedback, but it's possible to record your version as it's like a third track for the 2-track recorder. The teacher feedback track is the third one. So
a question about additional licenses. If somebody already has the physical Sanako license, do they need to pay an additional charge to get access to Sanako Connect?
I would first get in contact with one of our partners worldwide for that one.
Okay, and all partner details are available on the sanako.com website, of course. And a final question just before we hand over to Tu. A question again from Fella saying, do you have any tips for engaging introvert or shy students with, I guess, online speaking tasks generally?
I would consider myself fairly introverted, so I definitely would want to do these recording exercises on my own. So for shy and introverted students, you can create recording tasks where they don't have to be in a group or paired up with other people. It will boost their confidence as well when they hear themselves after a while, at least.
Excellent. And for those who just noticed their chat pop up, we've just posted the URL for Sanako resellers for anybody who has any specific queries or who wants to talk to somebody in their local area regarding the Sanako propositions or an installation. Aleksis, thank you very much for answering all of the questions, and thank you to everybody for your excellent questions following Aleksis's talk. Tu, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yes, thank you. So now I'll tell you more about how you can get a trial for Sanako Connect for 2 months, and it's free. So now I'll send you the link where you can just set up your trial account right away. This is the link for people in the US. So if you are inside the US, you can use this link, click into this one. The next link is for the ones who are outside of the US. So you can create your trial account using this link. So you can see here in the chat, there are 2 links that you can use to create your account. Just click into that link and you will be asked to set up your account with your name, your email and password. And when you click create, then that's done. You will be having a account already for Sanako Connect. Then after that, we'll send more information about the links if someone has missed it later on through email, and it will be together with the email that I'll send you about the recordings as well. Next week, we'll have an online Q&A session on the 6th of April. You can see the link for registration there as well. The link will be, you register for it, and you can enter and meet me and Aleksis again, and we'll be answering your questions with whatever you have trouble when you start using Connect. Okay, then just a bit of final sharing. So what's next is that you check your email inbox for communication from Sanako or with the reseller responsible for your area regarding recording of the webinar, how to get the 2-month free trial of the professional online language lab Sanako Connect, information about Sanako Connect user training session, which I also shared with you just now, and the upcoming webinars organized by Sanako. We'll have like the webinars organized normally once per month. And for more information, you can access to info@sanako.com or through our webpage, sanako.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed tonight's session, and enjoy the rest of your evening or enjoy the rest of your day. And do keep an eye on sanako.com and our presence on social media for future webinars like this. But thank you for your support today. It's very much appreciated. Thanks a lot.